Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I have my TBR for the Rereadathon that is happening next year in 2018. Rereadathon was created by Michael from Catalyst Reads, and I will link his channel down below. And this challenge is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically just encouraging you to reread some books that you have already read. Some of them are ones you want to give a second chance to, some of them are chances to reread old favorites that maybe you haven't read in a really long time, and I am a huge fan of rereading, so I definitely am excited to participate in this challenge. I know it's kind of late notice to join in, but apparently that's just what I'm going to do anyway. Now, each month has a particular challenge or kind of book that you are supposed to reread, and several of them have more than one challenge. In those cases, I have just picked one of them, and then if I decide I want to reread more books, I can do that, or if I want to focus on reading some of the books from my TBR that I haven't read, I have that flexibility too. January's challenge is to reread your favorite standalone and your favorite book from a series. And I decided to reread one of my favorite standalones, and that is The Princess Curse by Mary Haskell. And I actually just read this for the first time this year. February says to reread your favorite book that you had to read from middle school, and from high school, and from college. And I chose to reread Much Ado About Nothing, which is one of my absolute favorite plays of all time, and I read that for the first time in college. This challenge is to reread a nonfiction book, and an autobiography, and a memoir. And I decided to reread a nonfiction book, and that is War Paint, Their Lives, Their Times, Their Rivalry by Lindy Woodhead. April's challenge is to reread a book that confused you or that you had mixed feelings about. And for that one, I am rereading Beastkeeper by Kat Hellison because this confused me and I had mixed feelings about it. But it's a 3-star book that I've actually held on to, which is pretty unusual for me, so I'm hoping that I like it more this time. May's challenge is to reread a guilty pleasure, and that one for me is Jessica's Guide to Dating on the Dark Side by Beth Fantasky. This is a book about a girl who falls in love with a vampire, and even though I've been over the Twilight craze for a while now, I read this book somewhat recently, and it was just so much fun. I remember that the male love interest is just the most ridiculous series of cliches you've ever read about, and he's still so much fun and kind of charming, so I'm looking forward to that. June's challenge is to reread a book you hate or that you felt disappointed by, and for me that one is Haveli by Suzanne Fisher Staples. This is the sequel to Shabanu, which I have read and reread many times over, but I don't know if I've ever reread this one, and that's because I went into it with things I wanted to happen in this book, and pretty much none of them did, so we'll see what I think the second time around. July's challenge is to reread a book by a female author, and one by an LGBTQIA author, and one that deals with themes of diversity. And the one that I picked counts for several of those challenges, possibly for all of them, and that is Quicksilver by R.J. Anderson. I really love this book, and it features an asexual main character, which is not something you encounter a lot in fiction. August's challenge is to reread a graphic novel, and a short story, and a comic, and a poetry book, and I went with a short story collection, and that is Stars Above by Marissa Meyer. I specifically want to reread The Little Android and The Princess and the Guard because those are two of my favorite short stories from this collection, but I might end up rereading more. September says to reread a horror novel and a classic and a self-help book, and I chose to reread a classic, and that is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I talk about this book quite a lot. It's one of my favorite classics, one of my favorite novels, definitely a defining book for my reading life, and I'm really looking forward to rereading it for the 1000th time, it feels like. October says to reread a romance novel and a science fiction novel and a fantasy novel, and I chose to reread a fantasy novel, which is no surprise because that's my favorite genre, and I am rereading A Face Like Glass by Frances Hardinge. Frances Hardinge is one of my absolute favorite authors of all time. I recently did a recommendation video for her books, which I will link down below because I think she just should be so much more well-known than she is, and I'm really looking forward to getting back into her works and rereading the first book of hers that I ever read. November's challenge says to reread a controversial or problematic book, and for that one I am rereading Dear Enemy by Jean Webster. This is the sequel to Daddy Longlegs, and I do really like this book, but the problematic elements concern some of the scientific thought of that time, particularly as that relates to eugenics and criminal acts being hereditary, and basically how it deals with that. And even though many of the characters eventually come to realize that that's not an okay way to look at things. The book would definitely still be considered problematic, and there are aspects of it that are definitely controversial. And finally, December is to reread any book from any genre. And this is the one that I'm kind of leaving more open than others, even though of course like all TBRs, this is sort of subject to change as I read other books that I want to reread, and or I just change my mind or whatever. But the book I am sort of leaning towards for this one is Cruel Beauty by Rosamund Hodge. I have reread Crimson Bound by this author several times because I absolutely love that book, and even though I really enjoyed Cruel Beauty, I've only read it one time, so I'm excited to pick it up again. Okay everybody, so that is my TBR for the 2018 Rereadathon. Let me know down below if you guys are joining in, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!